Hi, my name is Kevin Richardson and I'm from FASTech, which is the Ohio reseller of Mastercam and also Eastern Kentucky. In this video we're going to be going over the product of Productivity Plus. Now most shops already use a Renishaw probe for simple procedure, such as finding a corner of a center of a workpiece in order to locate the origin for a CNC program. These probes have a tendency to be underutilized by programmers or even at the shop floor level. Some of this comes from actually just not being familiar with the capabilities of what a probe can do, along with implementing macros and logic in a program. We know the goals for owners are to run lean and in some cases unattended, but also keeping a standard. We have two choices in Mastercam in order to go ahead and probe for parts: Renishaw Productivity Plus or Simco Probe, and they both run inside of Mastercam. We're going to focus in this video on Productivity Plus. Some comparisons to consider is what is it that you're looking to accomplish on the CNC machine with your probe, pricing, cost and return of investment, ease of use, ease of setup, what type of functions you're looking for, and what knowledge you currently have of macros programming or probing logic. You can utilize Productivity Plus prior to cutting operations, between cutting operations, or after cutting operations. In a sense, what happens is with Productivity Plus, you just insert it in any of the operations, and of course they'll blend together and output the code that you're looking for. Now, one thing with Productivity Plus is it's recognized interface from Renishaw. So Mastercam has already a ribbon made for the probe when you install, and then the interface, unlike Simco probing, will look like the Inspection Plus. So with some individuals, they may like this option. It's an affordable solution to quickly generate code, capable of reporting, storing information to variables, supports Renishaw probes only, remachining, machine update cycles, creating work offsets, angled inspections, diameter, depth, and arc and circles. Also diameter offset adjusting. It supports solid model prep functions. Lollipop Stylus supports milling 3, 4, and 5 axis. Verifying collision for probe. Utilizing the CAD for selection. Window selection support, feature to feature select, construction geometry capable, and one of the things that we get asked a lot is, does it use for vector surface checking? Yes, this does. Productivity Plus does have the ability to go ahead and choose the vector of the surface, as you'll see in one of the illustrations I have in this video. Tool setting, tool breakage, and can be used in Mastercam for SolidWorks. So the people that run SolidWorks and Mastercam inside of it, Productivity Plus would be the choice if you decide to go do some probing. And we do 10 different languages, making it easier for end users who are not versed in English. Let's start with the difference of Productivity Plus, because the biggest difference is going to wind up being is in twofold. One is, how do you get it set up? As we spoke in the last video, Simco probing does not need any kind of additional effort to set up, as it goes off of the 9000 series macros you currently have. But with Productivity Plus, you do want to consider two things that typically your reseller will help you configure. Now, each machine may have different configurations as well. For an example, with the Renishaw, if you have a Mazak machine compared to Akuma, compared to Haas, and even Siemens, they have different kind of outputs and codes. So it's important to know exactly what those choices are. For an example, I'm going to go ahead and minimize my bar, and for clarity purposes, if you're watching both videos, I just changed the background a little bit, so that way if you are comparing videos, this one will look different than the Simco probing to give it better of a distinguished look between both. Now what I was referring to is there is a RenMF file that is typically when someone purchases the Productivity Plus that your reseller goes ahead and sends you or helps you fill out. And the editor that we have is right here that we send as well. And some of the things that you want to be considered on that is what's inside of that editor. As you go ahead and pick a RenMF file, there are certain features that we can go ahead and change so that way we can get the output according to what you're looking for. And one of the things are such as probe turn on, probing moves, and many other things that we kind of go fill out. Now typically this can wind up being a very simple process, but in some cases, we want to make sure that people have their own kind of flavor on how they want to go ahead and do maybe a touch feed rate, maybe a different feed, things of that nature. And of course it can take a little bit more time depending on what flavor they'd like to go ahead and have outputted. One of the things to consider is with Productivity Plus, and I'm speaking for FASTech as the reseller, is we try not to go ahead and override any values that you're using in Inspection Plus. And typically, not always, but typically they put these in the values of the 500 series. Notice that we go ahead and put ours into a 600 series, and this is to allow to make sure that there's no overriding of any variables that you currently have. As again, this is not using the 9000 series numbers. It's going to wind up populating a whole new calibration variables, and that's just something to think about. Not hard, as again I'll show you, but it's just something to think about when selecting the product. Now one of the things that we have to wind up doing is we have to calibrate one time, or if you change probes, stylus tips and so on, you want to make sure you calibrate, or what we call as an artifact. Now this process has to be done prior to utilizing Productivity Plus, as again the variables that I showed you, in this case in 600, they need to be populated. Most machines will have 0 in there, and we need to go ahead and fill some information out. But this is easily done by simply going up over to the tool probe and selecting the probe. In this case, what we're going to wind up doing is, you're noticing that I have a sample probe that's right here, and we can edit any of the areas and information that we have, such as OMP, going from an OMP 60, RMP, and etc. all the way down. I'm going to stick with the OMP right now, 40. You can also go ahead and change your stylus. In this case, if I go ahead and kind of just pick another one, you'll see the picture on here change as well. And of course you can see the length of each stylus, and you can pick a stylus if you want. If you don't find one that you have in the list, you can have a custom one and fill in the fields that you need to down here. So all these can make it really nice and easy to go ahead and choose different stylus. So one of the things you'll know is on ours we have the tool 1, which is that's our stylus at FASTech, and we simply go ahead and select OK. And if the database is modified, we can select OK, so it stores that stylus that we have. You can store as many as you like. The first procedure that you need to do if you're thinking about doing Productivity Plus is a probe calibration. Simply go ahead and pick on the probe calibration, and I'm going to go ahead and select, in this case, probed. Now clock means that you indicated this artifact in perfectly on center, and you already have the WCS selected as well. I'm going to go ahead and use the probe selection, and I'm going to go ahead and tell it that I'm just going to do the ring gauge. In this case, what's going to happen is I would expect the end user to touch off the top of the ring gauge and set a Z, and then I would have them eyeball the artifact as close as he can to the center as possible. The next thing I'm going to wind up doing is they want you to go ahead and actually put an exact diameter for the inside. In this case, I'm going to put 1.0, but in many cases it may be something like 0.9998 and etc. Just check your ring gauge, as it's typically engraved somewhere on the face. I'm working with G54. As you can see, 0 is the offset, and I'm going to simply go ahead and put the safe plane to about 1 inch and hit enter. Notice prior to that it had red, meaning I need to fill something in, so it kind of guides you through where you're at. Now in this case I'm probing the ring gauge, and I want to go ahead and have all the values selected. In other words, it's going to populate the values that I have there. Once I go ahead and select OK and backplot, and of course I'll move this over to the side, you'll notice that I'll play this and I'll actually go ahead and inspect for that ring gauge. And it'll wind up doing the 180 in there too, because that's what the probe means rather than clocked. And it'll go through there and do the vector calibration as well. Now this is an important step, and that's why I'm showing it in a video, because after you get this done, then typically everything's ready to go after that, and you're ready to start utilizing the Mastercam Productivity Plus. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started and see the part that we have and some of the inspection that we're going to be doing as well. I'll go back to the PowerPoint procedure, and what I'll do is I'll actually just go ahead and give a probing outline of what we're going to accomplish on this part. We're going to create a stock so we can probe off of that, and we're going to go ahead and reset the X, Y values in G54 into the controller. We're going to go ahead and select a couple of the width of the slots and use solid selection and create some variables. Now variables are basically information that's stored into the controller in areas. And these areas in that, what they'll do is they'll hold those values so you can actually do some computation, or you can actually just review of what is already placed in the variables so you can check your part. Inside pocket, review collision, diameter of holes, multiple variables. And what I mean by the tip of the hole table is if you're not using the hole table, this can become a very useful tool for many of you when you're using inspection, whether it regards Productivity Plus or Simco probing. Organizing your skills when you getting area designated for reports, keep in mind I just put this in a quotation, meaning that you probably will find out that if you're going to go ahead and do some probing, you want to go ahead and make sure that you're labeling things correctly, so that way organization will be a lot easier for you. And you're going to inspect half the arcs and reports. That will be fine, and we'll do a couple of Z-depth points and report as well. In this case with Productivity Plus, we'll also go ahead and do some vector reporting as well, and that's one of the big differences between Productivity Plus and Simco. Common questions in regards to Productivity Plus is how many probes can be used. Normally no more than 2 that you'd like, as again we set up the variables at 600, and of course we may use 700. You have to make sure that your variables are clear first. There's no lathe support as of yet, but I know that the time is coming to where this will wind up being an option at some point. You do need the RenMF file to be delivered and configured for the probe, so keep that in mind when we start it. Need to check an artifact as we talked about, and we're ready to go. So now that we have that done, what we're simply going to wind up doing is get the outline and start to go ahead and probe for the center. Now I'm going to do that by simply putting a 3D. I may go ahead and change the color as well, and I also may go ahead and change the thickness. For some of you that do not like to go ahead and do a right click and actually pick singular, you can always go ahead and pick on the toggle attribute, and this will stay on the screen at all times. This way I can go ahead and see exactly that I'm in 3D, a wire, and I may even make that a little bit thicker. With multiple screens, you can actually place this on another screen as well. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply go to the stock setup, and in the stock setup, I'm going to go ahead and do a bounding box. I'm going to want to go ahead and select the part that I have as well. I can actually hit Control All, Window Select, or just pick the part of the body. After I hit End of Select, I simply want to go ahead and go to the top center, in this case, and put the value that I'm looking for. In this case 11.5, I'll use 3.5, and I'll also use 1.5. I like to go ahead and make sure a lines and arc is selected and also face center points. It's just a habit I like to go ahead and do when I'm going ahead and making my geometry. And select OK, and select OK one more time. So now that I have the outline boundary, I have some CAD to pick from to go ahead and display and organize my WCS. all I have to do is go to the probe. When I go to the probe, everything that's in red is going to be something that's physically going to hit, and anything that's in blue here is something I can construct from the areas that I've touched or hit with a probe. And the NC file, you'll see me use this quite a bit to make variables and make comments to the controller. Now again, this ain't a training class or anything, but I want to let you know that what I'm going to hit and why, because actually when you get to the point of knowing what the different colors are, it makes it a lot easier to select. And I want to select a web measure pocket. I select it. I simply know that I have to go ahead and fill in information, as you can see red. I click on the point 1, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the midpoint, and then I'm going to go to the other side of the length and pick the midpoint to here. Again, the width I don't know unless I look at the print, but I don't need to because I just go ahead and click onto the 3 dots, and of course I just grab the width, and that grabs the width. I am going to go ahead and probe from the outside, and what this start clearance is how close I want to go ahead and start to the edge of the part, and I'm going to tell it to go ahead and stand off 1/4 of an inch on each side. So very easy to go ahead and place some values in there. My inspection depth is going to be -2, and I do want to go ahead and have my inspection depth. It does go to the center of the ball. Keep that in mind as well from the depth as it shows right here. I do want to measure the ends, and I only want to go ahead and have 2 hits on each end or each side. Now typically people see the linear distance, but you can do shortest as well, so there's some little things you can actually do to be creativity in this, but I'm going to do a linear hit. That way when it hits it, it comes out and goes all the way to the other side. That's typically what people are familiar with seeing. And when I do a clearance height, I just type that in, and that's all there is to it. Now, after it hits these points here, I tell the controller what to do. I simply hit the NC to update the controller, and I have some choices here. I'm going to simply go ahead and tell it that I want to go ahead and do a WCS update from G54. And of course, you have some ideas of set from feature or see material. I'm going to do an update, and I'm going to grab that feature that I had, and it's web pocket, and I click on it, and now it'll automatically put the values in X and Y for me. Once I go ahead and select OK, backplot, all I have to do is play it to get a visual first, and there you go. It'll automatically go ahead and pick the points, hit the edges for you, and of course the sides as well. Now one thing to consider on this thing here is to edit is very simple. If I want to start in a little bit further, as many do, I simply go back into the parameters. I go into the measured pocket to the inspection cycle, and you can see my standoff distance. I can place another value. In this case I may put 0.6 just so that way you can see a little difference. Select OK, regenerate it, and backplot, and you'll see that now it'll actually start off the part much further in these areas, and you can control however you like. Now the major difference between Productivity Plus and Simco probing is the output. Keep in mind that I'm comparing both products so that way you can make the choice that you need. When I go ahead and select the G1, I select OK. And I don't need to post everything. I'm going to post that web pocket that I have to produce the WCS. What's going to happen is, it's rather than posting out, it's going to send me that RenMF file that we talked about that we set up first. All I do is select that RenMF file we have and process it, and Productivity Plus will check to make sure everything looks good and I succeeded. When I'm done with that, again, it'll output all these areas and variables for you. Now, one of the questions we get is, when you post this out, it looks a lot longer. It can. It's not using a 9000 series variables as Simco probing is, but again, sort of like dynamic toolpathing, it seems to be a lot of code, but it's going to wind up being very robust and being able to go ahead and produce things the way that you want to. Also keep in mind internal programs are placed in there as well, but you do not have to do this at every single time. Typically once you go ahead and have your 2000 series numbers ready to go, for example when we first started, There's no need to go ahead and keep placing these macros in here. So again, a little bit of a learning curve, but once you go ahead and understand the difference in what it's doing, this product can be a very, very helpful tool for you. Let's go ahead and take a look at something to inspect as well. In this case, what I want to do is I have the ability to, I want to go ahead and do the pocket that's inside of here. Now in this case, what I'll wind up doing is I'm going to simply go ahead and do a toolpath and go grab a probe again. When I grab the probe, I'm going to use another web pocket, and what I'll do is I'll actually just fill in some information. I want the edge, I want the other edge, and I want to go ahead and grab the width. Notice I'm just grabbing the CAD, which makes it very easy to go ahead and manipulate. The wording in here is fairly clear. I want to do an inside. I want to have my stock clearance perhaps maybe at 0.375, and this is where when I pick that edge point to point, how far do I want to start off of each point? The inspection depth on this one here, I can simply go ahead, because one of the differences is it knows where you picked from, and I picked from this area here. I can just put -2, so it's going to be incremental from where you picked, which can be very handy as well. I'm just going to put -0.3. Do I want to measure the ends? Yes. How many points per side? 2. And of course, as you've seen before, I like to go ahead and use the linear. If you'd like, you always can go ahead and pick your standoff as well, and that usually helps. I'm going to pick, in this case, 0.3. Now to be organized and structured, I don't leave my pockets where they're at. I may label this here, and I'll show you that in a little bit here, but I'm going to rename this one. And I'm going to call this one ID Pocket. The reason for that is because it's easier for me to identify that later, okay, especially when you're probing. So what do I want to do with that pocket? Well, because I hit the red, that's going to go ahead and allow me to actually physically hit the probe onto the part and get a reading for me. But what do I want to do with that reading? Well, in this reading, I want to go ahead and place it in variables. Again, that's somewhere on the controller. In this case, I'm going to choose the variable 680. I select the NC. I go ahead and tell it that I want to go ahead and do a tool machine variable. The machine variable I'm going to use again at 680, and of course for Akuma, Siemens, Heidenheim's, and that, you can see that it gives you a structure of what you place in there. Okay, I'm kind of using a simple Fanuc, the pound 680. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to set the feature in case there is a feature already in there or a number in there. It'll automatically just replace it with the value that it hit into the probe. And the value, when I click on that, this way I know I'm doing the ID pocket, and I'd like to go ahead and do the width. So I do the width first and double click on it, and then what I can wind up doing is making another one for the length. I simply go ahead and click on it. I simply tell it what I want to do, machine variable 681. I tell it to set, and I tell it in this case here I'd like to do the length, and again I want to do the length into the ID pocket, and that's it. Now what happens is after it goes ahead and inspects the pocket, it will automatically go ahead and place those values in the controller, and I can see again on the CAD that it's going to show me all the moves that it needs to go to. There again, very simple to go ahead and use. Now what we'll do is we're going to do something that's a little bit different, maybe a slot or so. Now with the slot, I can actually go ahead and use a point segment, but in this case what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just show you that that web pocket can be very helpful in these areas as well. So what I'm going to do on this one here is simply go to the probe. I'm going to use the web pocket again. I'm going to simply go ahead and select, and notice I will select to the center, and as I do the next one I'll select to the other center as well. Again, picking the geometry and choosing from Productivity Plus and Simple Probing are different, but again trying to give you an idea of what the results you're looking for. I select the width, pick on the width that I want, and tell it it's an inside. Part clearance or start away, I may go ahead and only put maybe 0.1, and and you can adjust accordingly of what you want. In this case, I'm going to use, again, -0.2. I want to not measure the ends this time, as I just want to do a width on here, and then maybe 2 points per side. So in this case, by choosing no, it will not go ahead and hit the ends, and it'll only go ahead and hit the walls for me so I can get a width. Now what I'll wind up doing is, into the cycle, again, this tells me how much I want to stand off, and I can go ahead and put 0.2 if I feel comfortable. I tell it, again, the machine update, a variable, okay, and this variable, machine variable, in this case I'll use #683, and again set. And with the value, I typically like to go ahead and rename them, but I know I'm using Web Pocket 2, and I simply can go ahead and tell it the width of that, and that's it. What that'll do is, rather than just hitting one point in the middle, it will come down and automatically go ahead and select the areas that I have chosen and go over and pick. Now this shortest distance, you can see this line right here, and sometimes people will ask me about why does it have a zigzag. That's an easy one to go ahead and change. If you do not like the shortest area or the shortest direction, that is simply just into the measure pocket, and there's that shortest distance we were talking about. Again, sometimes people just feel comfortable using a linear, and if I want to make a change and regenerate it and backplot it, simple enough, come down, and now when it taps the side of the wall, it'll come back out straight out and go to where it needs to. So fairly simple to do. I'm going to do one more variable, and then we'll get to doing some deep printing. There's a little big difference on basically making a variable in deep print. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to check the angle of this line, okay, or this feature. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply make a little bit of, I would say, some geometry, just so you can kind of see that I can specifically tell it where I'd like to go ahead and hit the area. So I know I'm in 3D, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply do a wireframe, and this is a nice little tip if you just do a curve slice and do a flow line. When you grab a surface feature, you have the difference between a U and a V curve. In this case, it's going to be a U, and I'm going to tell it to make a number of 3. And what that'll do is it'll actually give me a center line automatically on any surface that I'm looking for. Now really what I want to do is maybe put some points on this this line here. So I do a point segment, select the entity, and just tell it maybe the distance I want to go is maybe 0.125. And you can see very easily that it just made, all these points in here. Now I can get rid of these lines. I really don't need them at this point. I can see the points fairly easy. And all I did is I didn't want to touch the very edge of it, right? So I just kind of gave it a distance where I can make an exact point where to touch. The other thing on this one here is I'm going ahead, and when I make this line, or when I do this line here, keep in mind that I want to use the actual angle. I want to find out the actual angle of what this is. I'm going to simply go ahead and do a toolpath. I'm going to do a probe, and I'm going to go ahead and select, in this case, a line. Now when I go ahead and select the line, I click on it and hit enter, and what I can do is I can actually tell it that I want to go ahead and do a measurement type of 2 points. Now the reason why I put these points on here, because it knows I don't really need these points here. In other words, I could just hit this line and it'll go ahead and tap each point of those lines. But if you did have a certain place that you wanted to tap those points, you can go ahead and change those points right in here, okay, just by clicking on those. So I wanted to let you know you have some options to select that. But I'm going to go into a -X direction, and in this case I want to go ahead and tell it a -0.2 depth. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to go ahead and do 2 points, okay, and make a linear distance. Now in this case I'm going to go ahead and call this one angle, just so I know what this line was. Again, it's a lot easier knowing what this is. And this is my angle line, so in case I want to, I can rename this here and just call it angle L. Okay, so how's that going to work? When I go ahead and play this, again, you can see that it's going to probe down in the area, and since I'm going into that -X direction, it'll go ahead and tap each area in 2 points, and it'll go ahead and that's it. It's not going to output anything for me, and the reason for that is because I simply need to go to the parameters. Okay, and one of the things we're missing is we have it to where it's going to select in this red area, but we need to go ahead and tell it what to do. In this case, before I do the control, I want to go ahead and grab over and tell it that I want to go ahead and do a constructed line angle. When I do the constructed line angle, all I really need to do is to go ahead and grab the angle that I measured, pull it down, okay, which is right here, and it'll go ahead and grab that angle. Let me pull that back up so you can see that again. So I'm going to kind of get rid of this angle here. So there's my inspection. Okay, let me get rid of this here because I went too fast with that. So again, in this one here, custom constructed line angle, and you'll see that I have 2 parts or 2 points that I can go ahead and grab for that. And what will happen is I can utilize this custom angle with a feature and grab this one here and tell it that I want to use the point that I made, okay, that automatically made it an angle, and this selected point 1, and I'll come over here and tell it I want to go ahead and do from that angle L point 2. And that's it. Well, what's going to happen is it's going to output that angle just based on that line that I have. Now when I go ahead and select OK and regenerate it, it knows the angle of that. Okay, so the last piece of the puzzle is going to wind up being for that angle is it does going to go ahead and hit it. It does know what to do with it, but it doesn't know where to place it at. And again, we talked about that as a variable. You can come back, and so what I'm showing you is you can come back into these parameters and add things that you may have forgot. I need to update that machine, do a machine variable, and simply go ahead and put the pound 682 in here. Now when I'm done with that, I set it and I just tell it what variable I'm looking for. You can see that constructed line angle is in there, and I want the actual angle that it actually reported. Now I completed my task. Regenerate it, backplot it, and of course it's ready to go. So now that we've did a pocket, an angle, and maybe a width of a slot, let's go ahead and get into some circles here. In this case, what will happen is I want to go ahead and locate these circles, but it can be very confusing just to go ahead and start selecting things and have a report. In this case, I want to do some deprint. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch to 2D. I'm going to make the line a little bit lighter, and I'm going to go ahead and put this Z at 50 thousandths. Again, so you can see I'm doing everything live. I want to go ahead and show you that there's some features in that you may be interested in. One of those is underutilized is drafting mode and whole table. With whole table, what I'm going to do is simply select over the part that I want, and instantly I'm going to move this text box over here, and it gives me an exact diameters of what they are and even a count to each one of them. And if I zoom up, you can see it labeled those right in those areas, so I know that those holes are all identical. The other thing when you're inspecting, the more importantly, is how we want to utilize that. Well, the maximum height I'm going to put in here is 0.25, which means it made these smaller in here. And I don't mind having this diameter and count here, but when I'm using inspection, I'd rather go ahead and use the location. And there you go. Now they label it B1, B2, B3, and so on. And now I even have the X, Y, Z position there for me to assist me. Now what some people can wind up doing is they make their own labels, and that's fine as well. You can do those, but again, I'm just using automatic. Now when I select OK, what will happen is my intentions is I want to inspect these holes that are right here, and I'm going to label them just as they are here. So what I'll do is I'm going to simply again go to the top where it has toolpath, probe, and what I'll do is I'll pick the circle. As I pick this circle, I'm going to go ahead and select the entities that I wish to pick. Notice again that I'm just kind of picking, and I'll hit enter. Now to make it a little bit easier for me to inspect, I'll move this over for a minute here, and this circle happens to wind up being, when I click on it, you can see it highlight, and I'm going to rename that one here and call it B1. And of course I figured that you'll know that I'm going to go right down the list real quick, and I'm just going to label accordingly. And that's the reason why I had those labeled so I can kind of get some information as I do a report. I'm able to see that very easily. And again, I'll show kind of a report how that works. B4 and B5. There you go. So in this one here, B1, what do I want to do? It's an inside. I want to go ahead and go down to -0.2, and the start angle is 0, 0. I'm using a 3-point method, so it's going to go around. Notice this is a full circle. I'll show the other one here in a little bit. And so I have all these circles, and I have all the information I want. Again, what do I want to do with it? Well, I don't want to make macros for this. What I want to do is I want to output these values to the controller, maybe even to a computer, so I can either save a printed out version or something of that nature. So rather than making a bunch of macros, which is going to have to be one for X, one for Y, one for Z, I'm just going to go ahead and simply do a report. And this report, what I can do is say, yeah, I'd like to put some tolerances in here as well. And I'm going to simply grab B1 to B5 and drag that in my report, and that's it. Now I'm actually reporting all that information very easily from my controller. If I play it, you'll see that I'll hit the areas that I want, and again I'll have that report. Now some of you may have different areas or methods to report, but what I'll do is I'll try to give you an idea of what that report would look like. In this one here, and I think I have this one labeled correctly, so let me see here. When I click on this, it's going to go ahead, and when I hit those holes, it's going to go ahead and come out and actually place out those values. Now it does look like I have the wrong one, so let me go back, because I had one also for the Simco probing, so let me use that one to give you an idea. There'll be a little sound with this, but it'll give you an idea. Now in this case, I picked the opposite ends in this in this realistic part that you're looking at, so keep that in mind too. It's not going from B1 to B2, but what I'm hoping that you'll see is when I'm probing a hole, once it lifts up and goes to the next hole, in real time what we're going to see is the output of each of the positions along with the deviation. Now this can be outputted in many different ways. We're using putty. You could use Simco as well. Don't get that confused with Simco probing. You can use that just with the Simco editor, and you'll get a different look and creation. So again, just letting people know what a D-print is. It's kind of important that we're taking a look at how that's going to output. That can save you just a lot of time in there. Okay, so we have this done, and we get a lot of questions on what if a circle's not, all the way around. Well, I'll show you that as well. So even onto the live webinar, when I want to do this outside here, one of the things I've noticed is I went to go pick it, and of course I struggled a little bit because I forgot this one simple rule, and this one simple rule is this. If I do a toolpath and probe, and I go ahead and use a circle, and I click on the model geometry, notice that's not a full circle, and I hit enter, then I can see this start angle right here is kind of locked. You can see it kind of has a question mark as well. When I type a value in here, just to give you an idea, I'll say 20, right? And I'll go ahead and say apply that, right? And I'll select OK. And now when I go back to that, just to give you an idea, okay, I'll go back into this measured, and that went right back. Well, here's why. When you're doing a partial hole, you're using a 3-point selection of a macro, and we want to go ahead and have a full circle. So it's really simple. Just do a 3D, do a wireframe, and all I'm going to do is kind of just do maybe 2 of these here for you. So I want to go ahead and do a 1 edge, and I want to select the edge on 2 of these and select OK. When I grab the wireframe, I'm going to simply just go up to the top and close an arc. Now I've got a nice arc that's closed. Now let's try that probe cycle again and see what happens. So I'll get rid of the one probe cycle and start a new one. Toolpath, probe, and I'll simply go ahead and grab the circle and grab each one of these circles and hit enter. As I do that, when I click on the circle, notice it'll highlight that circle here. And I also go ahead, and when I go to the start angle, it gives me an idea of where I want to start, as these angles are where they're coming from. So now I can go ahead and put maybe 30 in here. And the other one I'll put in here, possibly it's telling me where the other angle is, how far it is from here. Maybe I'll just go ahead and put something like 120, just so you can see some differences. And the other one I'll do the same. I'll come over here and I'll put 30, and I'll go ahead and put the 120 in here. Now, the distance that I'm coming down, I am doing an inside, okay, and I'm doing an inside of this as well, okay. And still, you can see it's not going over 180, but it still held my values. Now, when I go ahead and select OK, let's look at the top view and see how that worked. When I backplot it and go through this, and I'll turn the probe off so you can see it, the holder at least. Let's get this over here. Yep. So what will happen is when I come down, now I have the ability to go ahead and pick where I want, and that's that 120. If I want to make that further, I can simply go back over into the probe area, go over into the measured circle, and maybe add some more here. Maybe I want to go 160. Now, there's some differences. Again, if you watch the other video on simple probing, it is nice to go ahead and how they have it to where you can actually go ahead and visually see something as you're picking. I think that's kind of a nice feature. But this one here, so long as you kind of know what to grab onto the full circle, you'll get a great result as well. Okay, and of course we could deprint those areas as well. Now, one of the major differences is we can obviously do some arcs in here and some Z depths, and those are going to be simple by just hitting some points. But I want to go ahead and show you something that I think will help you with Productivity Plus and Simco to make a decision. When it comes down to, for example, features, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of exit out of here, and I'm going to go into my probing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply go ahead and go into Productivity Plus. I'm going to grab this surface probe. Now, this one here is kind of a big deal for people that do modes. So, you know, maybe when you're looking at the comparisons between both, they're fairly close, and maybe one is so much easier than the other, and maybe one takes a little bit more setup. But when it comes down to something of the surfacing, this is just something that Productivity Plus, for now, has an advantage over. Now, before I do this, what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these lines here. So that way in the future that you'll know how to go ahead and make some vector lines. They're very simple to do. And to save some time, I know that there are some gauge points that you already may have on there, or you can place them in there however you wish. But I want to let you know those points are right on those surfaces. So when I'm going to go ahead and do some surface probing and surface checking, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply go ahead and just make a line. And when I make a line, what I'll do is I'm going to actually go ahead and tell it the line normal. And I'm going to put a length on here of like 0.5. And how I do this is I click on the surface that I want and just hover over the point, and automatically that's going to go ahead and make a line for me. Now, notice this one here is out of range, so I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel and get rid of this line because I did not pick that surface. Let's do this surface. The next one I'll do is I do a line, normal, pick the edge, and instantly now I can grab that, and of course I can apply it and keep going on, so it makes it a lot easier. And again, I just put 0.5 in there as well. I apply it, click over here, and it goes right normal to the surface that I'm looking for. And this is important because vector checking, when you're doing a surface, you want to go ahead and go to the angle of the surface to get an accurate reading. And for this here, what I'm going to wind up doing is simply do a toolpath, probe, and I'm going to go ahead and grab a point. Now in this one here, what I'm going to do as a point is I can grab any point that I want, and I'm going to grab, notice I'm grabbing the bottom of where I want to check. There we go, and I hit enter. Now with these points being there, I'll be like 0.6, okay, it labels them or whatever it needs. But this approach distance, what I want to do is I'm going to grab this and simply go to the top of it. And if you notice, I'm just going down each one in my approach distance. I'm going to the top of the vector line that I made, which makes it very easy to go ahead and get the exact vector you're looking for. So a little bit of creation, but very simple, I believe. There again, measuring some points. There we go. And now what I want to do with them is maybe I want to output them. And again, a simple deprint reporting. All I have to do is come down, share that with my report, and it'll automatically come out to your machine, go through the machine, even into a PC if you want. You can go ahead and print out that report. Let's take a look at what that looks like. As I play it, it probes and it goes on a vector. So if I slow this down, it will go on a vector all the way across there. And you can see I'm not even hitting that part. And if I wanted to, I can check for collision detection as well. So I don't have to worry about going back out to the machine, adjusting things, and knows exactly where to go. And that's it. So I gave you some ideas on the differences between Productivity Plus and simple probing. Hopefully I gave you enough information to where you can go ahead and make a choice. It's not uncommon for sometimes people to actually have Simco probing in a shop and also Productivity Plus. So there's those areas as well. You can utilize both systems, as you see I have in Mastercam, and they do not conflict each other. So again, hopefully this helped, and if you need to, give us a contact and call, and we'll be able to share some more information.